Hey guys, Drifter here. In case you haven't already heard, because the entire internet's on fire about it, the US government is considering either banning or regulating loot boxes in video games. Personally, I say it's about time. I think that this is long overdue. However, today, instead of offering a lot of my personal opinions, I wanted to take a close look at the proposed legislation and on the effects that it could have on the industry from an economic perspective. So let's jump straight into the details. Republican Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri announced that he will soon submit a bill to the Senate to ban loot boxes. The bill is called the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA. The bill, before it becomes law, has to be debated in two houses. That'd be the House of Representatives and the Senate. It will likely be amended or changed from its original form, and then it has to be signed into law by the president, and the law enforcement agencies, attorney generals, police, whatever, have to actually enforce it. So there's quite a few steps to be taken before loot boxes just disappear. The reasons that Hawley listed for wanting to ban loot boxes are ones that we all know about as gamers. He said developers knowingly allow minor players to engage in microtransactions, game developers shouldn't be allowed to monetize addiction, and when kids play games designed for adults, they should be walled off from compulsive microtransactions. Many people find them to be unethical, expensive, misleading, and often difficult to understand because the math required to figure out how much a loot box is worth can sometimes be very complex. Or perhaps let's hear from the man himself, because he says it best from his own personal Twitter account.
A loot box is where, in the midst of a game, the person who's playing the game, a child in this case, can pay additional money in order to get certain advantages within the game. It's sort of a hidden fee. These are games that usually are free or purport to be free, but then in the midst of the game, the companies say, well, listen, if you'll give us some money now, we'll give you some advantages in the game. And the point is to get the kids to keep playing and also to be spending their parents' money. So the companies get two things out of it. They get more money, and they get the kids addicted to the game. This needs to stop. They need to be upfront about what their games are actually doing, and they need to stop practices that intentionally exploit children.
In related news, the Federal Trade Commission is planning to create a policy workshop for loot boxes in August. This came after complaints from Democratic Senator Maggie Hassan. So there was already some government interest. There was some things going on already. The actual text of the bill itself is not publicly available yet, as it has not yet been submitted to the Senate. However, Senator Hawley did release a PDF outline on his own personal website that more or less shows what he wants to accomplish with the bill. And before we read over that, I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of today's video, which is Blue Microphones. The video that you're listening to right now, my voice, and pretty much all the content on this channel for the last 10 years that you've heard has all been recorded on a Blue microphone. I have a link down there in the description and a code that'll get you a pretty significant percentage off depending on what country you're in. And personally, best bang for your buck, you're starting a new YouTube channel, I recommend the Yeti Nano. So as stated, the bill is designed to apply new consumer protections to games played by minors, including games targeted at those under the age of 18. This would be determined by the subject matter, visual content, and other indicators similar to those used to determine the applicability of the law itself. Games with wider audiences whose developers knowingly allow minors to play and engage in microtransactions would also be subject to this law, i.e. something like Fortnite or Call of Duty or Overwatch. The bill would attempt to ban or prohibit what he considers manipulative design, which he lists as loot boxes, or microtransactions offering randomized or partially randomized rewards to players. He wants to ban pay-to-win systems, which is a manipulation of the game's progress system, typically by adding artificial difficulty into the game to force players to spend money when it could be available at no cost. Very bad against pay-to-win, where you just buy better items to beat other players. And when it comes to enforcement, his recommendation is that the Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, which they enforce all the guidelines on my videos, like the blue sponsorship that I just called out. I have to call that out. I have to say that it's sponsored because the FTC makes me, or, I get a huge fine. They would regulate this type of economy in video games, and state attorney generals would have discretion on whether or not they want to press charges if any of the game companies violate laws in that state. So it's a pretty straightforward ban on loot boxes. It's actually kind of not clickbait here. He seems to really want to ban, prohibit, regulate, limit, and be done with loot boxes in general. Let's briefly take a look at Senator Josh Hawley because he is an interesting character and it helps to know who writes the laws to better understand their intent. He's 39 years old, which makes him the youngest current senator. He was elected in 2018, defeating an incumbent Democrat briefly after becoming the state attorney general, so he's kind of on a meteoric rise right now. Overall, he would most likely be considered a moderate Republican. He's best known for being very critical of big tech companies like Google and Facebook. He's a big proponent of anti-conservative bias in tech companies. If you're familiar with that, I'm sure many of you are. He investigated Google for antitrust violations and Facebook for user privacy violations after Cambridge Analytica. He's very pro-guns rights, very anti-Obamacare, very pro-wall, strong border, pro-tariffs, and generally supports the president in most things. However, as Attorney General, he did investigate 3 pharmaceutical companies in regards to his state's opioid crisis. And the weirdest thing that I was able to find about him is that Hawley stated, I almost can't, is that Hawley stated human trafficking is the result of women's sexual revolution in the 1960s due to the social encouragement of premarital sex and the use of contraception. After receiving criticism for these statements, Hawley reiterated that Hollywood culture was a major cause of human trafficking. So that's kind of a weird view stance, and overall Hawley seems to be a bit of a hodgepodge of views, which is why I'd call him a moderate Republican, and he seems to be a slightly more pro-regulation Republican, because Republicans and the right wing in the United States typically are in favor of corporate freedoms. They're very pro-business, and they tend to think that businesses can solve every problem in existence and that the laws of economics are the best things that should be applied to even social problems. They're very much so against taxes and regulations and restrictions, so it's very rare to see a Republican, especially a Republican senator, propose new regulations to the Congress, and that usually means that whatever he's proposing a fix to has gotten really bad. If Republicans care about what's going on with businesses and they think that consumers are getting screwed, we have a serious problem. That should be like a big wake-up call, because normally they're all about letting businesses do whatever they want. The Entertainment Software Association, which is a video game lobbyist group, sent over a statement after the bill was introduced saying numerous countries, including Ireland, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, determined that loot boxes do not constitute gambling. We look forward to sharing with the Senator the tools and information the industry already provides that keep the control of in-game spending in the parents' hands. Parents already have the ability to limit or prohibit in-game purchases with easy-to-use parental controls. That's kind of what I would expect from a big organization that represents video game companies. They want to keep the loot boxes going because loot boxes make money. And now at the end of the video, I want to talk about the industry impact of this decision should we actually ban loot boxes. I doubt that very many game companies will be in favor of this, because it takes away their freedoms and their agency of decisions and their business models a bit. It just takes away some of their abilities to make money, which will mean it will deeply cut into revenues and likely force another massive industry changeover. Games have not risen in price in 15 years despite inflation. It's still a $60 game, even though $60 isn't worth what it used to be. So $60 is really not the true price of hardly any game anymore. In order to supplement this low price and make some money back, microtransactions and DLC over time have given rise to new means to keep the entry price to gaming low so that you can get in low and they'll get the profit out after the initial purchase. However, this is a industry-wide practice. This isn't just a couple companies. Everybody's doing it, so everybody's competing tooth and nail for the next thing. And if what you do is you ban this business practice where game companies can't do this, you're looking at 3 potential outcomes, or perhaps some mix of them. Number 1 is that game quality goes down. Games just go back to how they used to be, $60 with very limited DLC or post-purchase stuff going on, but since you can't make as much money out of that, typically quality is going to go down, lower return on investment, and lower potential revenue. Game prices could go up and keep the quality the same, but we might be looking at $100 or $120 games, or, and I think this is the most likely one, game companies will come up with some other new or interesting way to monetize their game that we really haven't thought of before. They'll just come at us with something crazy like Fortnite did with their Battle Pass that shook up the whole industry. But either way you cut it, if loot boxes get banned or regulated or restricted, you are looking at a massive changeover in the entire video game industry nationwide, because the US is still a software leader in that regard. We're talking change this with the speed and the difference, the likes of which you have never seen. So crazy things might be coming. Guys, that's all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something useful. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Drifter out.